Hey everybody, what's going on? Hellmite here, bringing you another video from Grab the Lantern today. Today I wanted to give my first few impressions of the new item system, where I think it's at, and generally what I'm thinking of it after just a couple of days playing with the new preseason patch and the new preseason items. Now I know I did a pros and cons earlier when the item system was still coming out to kind of say, hey, well here's kind of where I'm thinking it's at, hey, here's what I think will be sort of fun or what I think will be bad about the new system, but this video will be me actually having played with the new items and being able to say, hey, here's where I'm kind of thinking I'm at with it. Now, so first and foremost, let's go ahead and start with the things that I think aren't so great about the new item system, as that's very obvious and that's really, really easy to talk about. First and foremost, the item icon design is awful, just completely terrible. There are a few items that it is easy to kind of figure out what exactly it is you've built or that your opponents have built, and to be fair as well, a lot of it is going to be playing with the item system more and getting used to seeing certain icons that didn't exist before or which are updated. I do think that a lot of it is unfamiliarity, but I also will say that some of the item icon design has not been very good. I think Riot could definitely have done more to refine the item icons and make it so that they do stand out, especially when viewed from far away, as opposed to the close-ups they've sort of been giving us for the most part. I feel like really they could have done a much better job at figuring that out. Especially, I feel like a lot of the problems I have is that the items are very small and that the background of the item is the exact same color as the item itself, which just sort of leads to a blob of green or blue or red or what have you, and it's hard to really distinguish exactly what that item is supposed to be or exactly what it is that's going on with it. I feel like a much better design would have been to just put the items in a black background with just the item in whatever colors it is, because that way it would be easier to distinguish the shape and form of the item from afar, especially. And even when you consider items like Rage Knife in comparison with the jungle item that gives challenging smite, you'll forgive me for maybe not having all the names down immediately, but the Ember Knife, that's the name. So Rage Knife and Ember Knife, very, very similar items. They're both knife looking. They both have a very orange background. Those items do look very similar, especially with the backgrounds that they have, but if they had a black background, it wouldn't be as big of a deal. It would be a lot easier to tell exactly what those items are and how they differ from each other. So I'm hoping Riot does consider changing those around. I don't think it's a huge deal. Again, I do really think that at the end of the day, Riot will, or we will kind of adjust to them, and because we'll get used to seeing, especially all these new items in inventories and being able to tell at a glance. But for the moment, at least, I do feel like readability is a bit of a problem with the new system. Second of all, I think hybrid champions really feel like they've got left in the lurch in this new system. It feels really hard to have an item that these champions actually want to buy, and on hit feels kind of sort of super weird to build because it doesn't feel like there are very many items that contribute meaningfully to an on hit type build. I think they do exist for sure, don't get me wrong, but I do feel like at the end of the day there are some weird oddities with how hybrid champions want to build and how on hit champions want to build. I feel like the loss of Gunblade is sort of a big deal, just in that, even disregarding the Omnivamp and the active, I do feel like the biggest problem I have with Gunblade disappearing is that it gave AP and AD as a very solid first item, and that sort of doesn't exist anymore in the new system, at least not as far as I've seen. If there is a very obvious hybrid item that's in the system that's a mythic item, let me know down in the comments. I would love to hear it, because apparently I didn't see it. But I don't think there really is a good item for those champions. It feels like they're really just kind of making do with a bad situation and trying to figure out where they can best, what items they can build best, as opposed to beforehand where they really did have just like, okay, this is what hybrid champions build kind of thing. So I do feel like they're a little bit left in the lurch. AP junglers I know right now are also having issues. When do they not is sort of the question to be asked. It does feel like AP junglers almost without fail have problems in preseason, just with clearing, with being impactful, with generally having performance in the jungle. I do think that Riot are going to be buffing them up at some point to make sure that they feel better, but for the moment, it did feel like AP junglers are just kind of in the lurch, and Riot haven't done enough to really make them feel better. But it does kind of make sense because there aren't that many AP junglers. Fiddlesticks and Diana are the two I can think of off the top of my head, and that's really it. Whereas AD junglers, I could name any number of champions that build AD in the jungle. So hopefully Riot do get around to fixing them sooner rather than later. I do think that Liandry's Anguish, I did say, it is nice that you have this sort of anti-tank option that you can build as a mage. It feels really good that there's this sort of item that you can say, yeah, I'm up against, Galio, Malphite, Ornn. Yeah, of course I want this item. That makes total sense. But it does feel bad because it's a core item. It doesn't really feel like it's slowing down the mid laners at all. They're just sort of able to say, yeah, this is the obvious choice. This is just what I'm going to build. And especially for champions that already have damage over time effects like Brand, it's like a really obvious first item because it gives you the mana, it gives you the burn passive, it is your mythic, so you're not, holding yourself back by building something else first. Like, really, there's very few downsides for champions like Brand building Leandry's Torment, and especially if there are a lot of tanks, there are like very few disadvantages to building this item in the first place. So I am a little disappointed in that regard because it does make tanks feel a little bad to play, but at the same time, tanks are doing a ton of damage this season. I think a lot of the winningest champions so far on the preseason patch are tanks, so I can't complain too much. I do feel like they're doing a really significant amount of damage, which may or may not be a problem in and of its own, because they're just sort of able to walk up next to you with the Sunfire Cape going and just do a ton of damage by standing next to you, especially champions like Amumu, who never really adjusted from the sort of old tank playstyle that they used to have, which is you initiate and then you walk around doing ambient AoE damage to nearby champions. And Amumu, especially because he shreds magic resistance and all the damage dealt by the tank items is magic damage, he just really is able to put out some DPS, which is a little weird to think about, but it does mean that tanks aren't in as bad a spot as I was expecting them to be preseason, so that is a bit of a good thing. Now for the good, because I do think there are a lot of good things that the item system is doing for me so far. I feel like the item design in general feels very useful, especially in regards to the mythic items. I actually was in a Urgot versus Ornn matchup in my very first game of preseason and went Divine Sunderer because I was like, well, I want some tool to deal with the Ornn. I know it's a Spellblade passive, which does make it a little bit harder for me to use, but it actually felt useful. I was actually able to kind of cast a spell, get that first hit in for a good chunk of damage, a bit of a heal, and really help chunk the Ornn out. And I was like, okay, cool. So this item, sure, it may not be Stridebreaker, which I played a little bit on PvE of with Urgot, and that felt great. But so it's not Stridebreaker. I won't have that ability to sort of lock down squishies, but I do still have the advantage of being able to, if I'm in a side lane against the Ornn, sort of wear him down over time and really plink away at him with this Divine Sunderer. And I didn't feel bad about the rest of the stats the item was offering, is I think the biggest thing with it. The stats were really, really nice, even regardless of the Spellblade passive, which I wasn't able to properly use, but it didn't feel like I built this item and that was a tremendous mistake across the board, right? Whereas I do feel like in older systems, you would kind of build an item that was unoptimal on your champion, and it just kind of ceased to do anything because it wasn't optimal. This did feel like it's just a tool in the toolbox, even though it wasn't like the premier item for Urgot to build, it was still very useful. And so in that regard, Mythics feel more like a toolbox you get to pick and choose from, rather than just the gluey sort of you build this first in every game, period, item system that we had before, which feels super useful. So Corki, for example, I was able to still go Trinity Force first, even though that's technically a bruiser item now, so that felt really good. That was like, okay, cool, this is usable. I feel pretty decent about building that, even though technically it's not for a champion that it's supposed to be for, right? It's a bruiser starting item, but hey, I got to build on Corki. It still felt just as good as it did before. It felt like it had some stats that were going to be reliable for Corki. So in that regard, really, it is just looking at Mythics and saying, what do I want for the specific scenario or for the specific matchup, rather than just building the same thing first in every game. So I do quite like where that is at and where the new system is going to be going from there. So I like that. And the biggest thing for me is that the item system changes didn't really affect PvP interactions too badly, which is quite nice. I know a lot of people were concerned about, oh, well, you just build all the most broken things and you just win because they have powerful actives, they have super good passives, you just kind of build the busted crap and you win automatically any interaction you have from that point on. But I don't feel like that's where we've ended up. It still feels like most combats are resolved through champion interaction and not, I built this item so I win. It really is kind of, yeah, you still have to get the outplay, you still have to land sweet spot Qs on Aatrox, you still have to get the flip on Urgot, you still have to land EQ as Jarvan. Like, none of that is changing about the game, regardless of where the item system is at. Now, the items do give you some amount of flexibility and some amount of bonus stats and maybe some extra tools to work with. Stridebreaker, as I mentioned before, is a really nice tool for especially a champion like Urgot to be able to, he flips into range or he flips somebody and then he's able to get a slow, so even if you're able to dash to safety, he can kind of dash to follow you up, slow you down. It gives you a few more tools in that regard. In a similar fashion, I know Everfrost, a lot of mid laners have been building because it's doing an absolute ton to just increase the power of these champions and able to say like, hey, I'm able to set up these CC chains a lot more reliably than I did before. Like, that's really nice. I do like how those interactions are resolving, but again, it doesn't feel like, well, you built this item and the item itself is broken and that's why you won. It still feels like you have to execute on your champion regardless. Now, if you're playing a lower skill cap champion, so someone like Garen, well, it's a lot easier to benefit from some of the items because it's not as hard to execute on the champion. But if you are playing a higher skill champion like Ezreal or Aatrox, you do have to execute. There's no other argument for it, regardless of how broken you think the items actually are. And in that regard as well, I do like that there are fewer actives. It really reduces your mental strain and your ability to remember everything that you've built and sort of say, oh, well, yeah, that's right, I totally forgot my Zani's Hourglass, or I totally forgot my Blade of the Rune King, or what have you. The fact that a lot of them are now just kind of passive bonuses, I do like, because it reduces that, and also it makes it more of a game. In a similar fashion to how I really like the design for Kled W, where he has to use it or lose it. If he uses it, if he auto-attacks a minion when he's got his W up, he's gonna use his W. He has no option for it. But then if he's not using it because he's trying to hold it for a PvP interaction, he doesn't then have it. He's maybe missing CS or using other cooldowns to try and last hit while he holds onto his W. And in that regard, certain item abilities like Eclipse or Blade of the Rune King, they do have this sort of feel to them where it is, yeah, I want to hold onto this for when I need it, but also I may be unable to do that. So you kind of have to pick and choose your battles and think about it a little bit, but it's just nicer because it's not an active. You're not waiting for an ability to cool down. It's sort of, yeah, I've got this, and it's going to trigger when it does or when it doesn't, and I can influence that a little bit, but I also don't have so much to think about, like, oh, was that a problem that I Bladed the Rune King right there? So I do think that's an interesting place for the item system to be at. But anyways, those are just kind of my thoughts on the item system for the start. I hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know what you guys are thinking of the preseason itemization now that it is live. I would love to hear what you guys are building, what you guys are thinking about it, and where you generally feel like the preseason is going. Let me know all that down in the comments. If you enjoyed today's video, go ahead and leave a like. And if you really enjoyed today's video, consider subscribing. I upload a video every Monday, Friday, and on patch days as well. Once again, thank you guys so very much for watching. I do appreciate it. And I'll talk to you all later.